Hello, in this series of videos we're going to be talking about Spark and Apache framework for building distributed applications, highly performant and operating on big data. So in this series I'm going to be using Scala and IntelliJ to write this code, and I welcome you to follow along with me in setting up this environment today. So I will not be going over how to install Spark or how to install IntelliJ. Those things are very readily found online with just some simple searching. So there are lots of resources out there for how to install Spark on your machine, whether you're on Windows like I am currently, or a Linux machine, or Mac, so on and so forth. But today I just want to show you how to very quickly get this IntelliJ project set up, created, and just walk you through a simple hello world program for Spark. So once you have IntelliJ open, go ahead and go to File, New, Project, and then we're going to be using Scala, and then we're going to be using Sbt as our project management tool. So click Next after that point, and it is going to prompt you for a project name as well as a place that you want to store your code, and then a couple other versions. So I'm using the Open JDK version 1.8 on my machine. Feel free to use that or a newer version. For SBT, it frankly does not matter too much. However, I'm using 1.2.8. And then lastly, for Scala, we'll actually be using 2.12.8 in this series of videos, if you'd like to follow along with that. After you're done with that, click Finish, and the IntelliJ dialog here will close, and it will go ahead and create your new project and scaffold all of that for you. Since I've already got mine created, I'm going to hit cancel. But once it finishes, you should see a list of your folders over here, and you'll see there's a project that is for storing some small artifact things, and then source for your source code, and target, which is where ultimately our complete jars will be built. So we'll get to this momentarily. Once you've got it created though, the first thing that you should do is go over here to your build.sbt script, and this is how SBT sort of manages your project versions, your artifact information, and your dependencies. So the artifact information up here, I'm just going to say, we'll call this learn Spark, and I'm going to use my GitHub path here as the organization name. So if you're at a company, you might say com.google. Whatever. So we're not actually going to be doing any deployment or release management, so I'm not going to bother changing the version, but we're going to be using version 0.1. And then these things are just a couple little goodies that I've thrown in here for my own personal preference. You don't really need them, but feel free to add them if you'd like to. And we are again using Scala 2.12.8. And then lastly, the only dependency that we'll have currently is the Spark SQL library. So if you haven't noticed, I'm using Spark 2.4.3, a fairly recent version as of the making of this video. We might add new libraries later, such as the Spark Graph library and Spark Machine Learning and so on and so forth, but currently this is all you should need. Right, so once you're done with that, you will be prompted to import those. So if you make a change to this file, it'll pop up down here saying, hey, you've got a change to your dependencies or a version or something to your project. You need to import those. So you can just click import changes and it will import them. I'll go ahead and do that just to show you. So it's doing a little SBT processing right now while it imports that. And once you have that done, you're ready to start writing the code. So if you go over here to the source folder, you'll already have a main and a Scala folder, and inside that you can create your own packages and classes and whatever else. So let's right click the Scala, new package, and you can call this whatever your organization is. So you might just use your com, your first name, your last name, right, or whatever you did for the organization, and then click OK, and it'll create a package. So I have already created a package called com.github.zzking.learn Spark, and inside of that you would then click New Scala class and select an object, because we want to create a singleton class with Scala. And you can name this Hello World or Hello Spark, whatever you would like, and then just click OK to create that. So at that point, you should be matched up with what I have here, except for this little run.bat script that I have, and I'll get to that here in a moment. But otherwise, you should have a pretty identical project hierarchy. So go ahead and open up your brand new Hello Spark class, and inside of that you can start looking at the code here that I've already written ahead of time, and you can follow along with me. So for future videos I will be writing the code as we go. However, for today I just wanted to do a quick Hello World and show you, what sort of things that we'll be starting out with. Right. So to get started on this, you'll see that I've imported the Spark session class. So whenever you have an application with Spark, you have to create a Spark session. Basically, there is one Spark session for each Spark application, essentially, is one way to think about it. And when you create the Spark session, you use this builder pattern, right? So before we get to that, let me just point out, if you're not familiar with Scala, this is basically the syntax for creating a entry point in Scala. So in other languages you might have, for example, in C++, you might see int main and then blah 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 return 0. So this is essentially that for Scala. And so yeah, once we're in the main function, I'm going to create a Spark session using this Spark session.builder.getterCreate, and that will give me that Spark session. If I wanted to annotate my type just to say, hey, this variable is a Spark session type, I can do that as well. Okay, so once we've created our Spark session, we can go ahead and do things like read in files, do transformations, and all kinds of cool work on the data, and then possibly write out data to new files, so on and so forth. All those things that we'll be covering later in this series. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just read in this source file that you're actually viewing right now. So to do that, I'm going to access this Spark session and do read text and then the path to the file that I'd like to read in. And this path is actually a relative path to the project folder. So that is why I'm starting out with source, such as source, main, Scala, so on and so forth. Right? And once I've read that in, I basically have this file of data stored in a tabular format, and you'll see that once we run this program and you see the output, it'll make a lot of sense. But for now, think of this source file variable as a table, and each row in that table is a line in this file. So after I've read in the file, I want to show the first 5 lines, and to do that with Spark, you can use this .show function. And the show function takes a couple of arguments that are both optional. The first is num rows, so I'm specifying I only want to show the first 5 rows. And the second option is truncate. So if there were a line that were really, really long, like possibly this one, then by default this would get truncated and it would actually print out as like val source file equals spot, and it would lead the file, so it would get truncated. And I'm saying don't truncate, I want to see the full file whenever I output this. So this line is going to give us some nice debugging output to show you that this worked. Next, you can do some things like counting the number of lines in the file. So we're going to do .count. You can also do, filters using a SQL syntax. So I can look for all the variables that are defined with val just by saying source file where the line basically contains the val keyword. So I'm using, again, SQL syntax to put these percent signs in here, which are wildcard operators. So I'm really just saying anything, val, anything, right? Whoops. And you'll see this in action. And say I only care about the first two variable definitions in the file, I can limit that to 2 so that it finds val spark, val source file, and then stops. It doesn't do any more scanning of the data, so it doesn't even bother checking this line or so on. And then we're going to output that as well, but notice this time I didn't specify a num rows, right? However, it only has 2 rows, so it's going to show both of those rows. And then lastly, just as a good rule of thumb, it's good to explicitly stop your Spark session, so I'm going to call the .stop function on that. Right, so at this point we're ready to give this code a run and start looking at our output. So since I'm on Windows, it's a little bit difficult to do development work like this. However, this is what I'm on at the time, and for the sake of making things simpler for me to run these examples during this series, I've created a little batch script, which is a Windows script for executing the Spark submit command. But this is essentially what I'm running. So I'm doing a Spark submit to submit my application, which is the jar that we're going to build, and that jar will be located at this path. And then we need to tell Spark which class that we're actually going to execute as our entry point. And right now it's Hello Spark, but in other videos we're going to create more classes and change that each time. So to make that kind of configurable, I'm just going to take that as a command line argument to this script. So for this example, I'll say run Hello Spark. And then we're also going to use that argument to name the application, just for the sake of having it named. This is completely optional. And then we're also going to be taking up all of the cores available to my local machine. That is what this little asterisk here means. So if you wanted to change that to say 2 or 4 or however many cores is available on your machine, you certainly can. However, I'm going to just tell it to use all of mine. And then the last little flag here you'll see is I'm setting a configuration value for Spark to change where it stores its temp files. So I've created this folder in my project root called temp, and that's where this is referring to. So this is really just a place for Spark to store all sorts of temporary data, such as like checkpoint information or other jars. So this is something that we'll want to purge each time that we run the application, just to make sure that we have a clean environment to run on. So that is what the second line does. It just kind of purges that folder for me, right? So to actually run this though, we need to spoiler alert there. Yeah, we need to create our jar first. So if I execute sbt package inside the project folder, that will go through compiling all our Scala source code and creating the jar that you saw referenced here. Alright, so it's done compiling, and at this point I'm going to use my script to run this, and you'll see the full Spark submit command right here with that value substituted. So Spark gives a lot of info logs that tell you different things that it's doing, about the scheduling and the execution plan, so on and so forth. But here is our very first output, and you'll see that it says job 0 finished, show at hello Spark line 10. And if you go to line 10, sure enough, that's our dot show. So that is the first 5 lines of our file. And again, so now it should make more sense. When I said that this is in a tabular format, in a table, then this table is really just one column, and that column name is called value. So this line should make a little bit more sense now, hopefully. It might have been a little bit confusing why I was saying where value, like val, but this is the column name in our table. So I'm saying where that column, where whatever is in that column is like this, right? And then because we limited to 2, you only see 2 lines in that output. So let's scroll down to that. There we go. That's our 2 lines. Awesome. And then this line is somewhere in that log. I'm not going to worry about that at this time, but hopefully this makes a little more sense now, and hopefully this has been helpful in getting you jump started with creating this code setup so that you can follow along and learn you some Spark. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video where we're going to be talking about Spark data frames, which is a very high level abstracted data structure, and believe it or not, you've already seen a glimpse into data frames. These little boxes right here are data frames. But more on that in the next video. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.